Right? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen. To close the formal academic aspect of our 2015 Dublin Global Internship Conference, we have a very special treat. Some of the brightest minds, some of the best thinkers, bringing their intelligence to bear on one of the fundamental questions of our time. Is the primary role of the university education or employability? We'll be using a slightly modified version of the British parliamentary debate format, so that instead of asking the Prime Minister to, to define all of the terms in the debate question, I will ask each of the first speakers, the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, to define education and employability as they will be using them, right? And then they can develop those concepts in their talks. In the interest of time, I will attempt to define the other terms. I take primary to mean the main, the principal, the overriding role, not just to be what the university actually does, but what it sets out to do, its purpose. And a university is understood to be an institution of higher learning, a grouping of teachers and students pursuing knowledge and, except in the state of Wisconsin, seeking truth. Now, the Socratic Liberal Party, favoring education, will take the part of the government, since their party has been in office more or less without interruption for the past 2,500 years. The Edisonian Alliance will take the part of the opposition, seeking to refute the Socratic Party's arguments in favor of a classical education. The debate will adhere to strict time limits. The principal speakers, that is, those taking the roles of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, will each speak for a maximum of 15 minutes. They will be followed by advocate supporters of their positions, each speaking for a maximum of 7 minutes. We'll then have time for questions and comments from the delegates in the chamber, after which all delegates will have the opportunity to vote for the more persuasive of the two positions. Now, to the speakers. I call upon the first speaker, the Right Honourable representative from the District of Barnet and the leader of the Socratic Liberal Party, Dr. Michael Woolf. Dr. Woolf.
Lords, ladies and gentlemen, Aidan made reference to the best minds of our generation. They couldn't turn up, I'm afraid, this evening. So, I thought I'd step in at the last minute. But it is a pleasure to be here in the land of scholars, saints and sinners. By way of diversion, if this gets boring, you may want to look at the person sitting next to you and decide which of those they are. It's always something to... This is also where the great James Joyce redefined the ways in which novelists represent reality, where one of the 20th century's poetic geniuses instructed us that in 1916 the world was all changed utterly, a terrible beauty was born. And above all, where the wise magi of GIC had the good sense to invite me to preach to you today, and to bring some biblical wisdom to this congregation of largely godless heathens. Thus, in the next 2 hours or so, something like that, I shall exorcise... What's wrong with that? Oh, yeah, I shall exorcise the demons of utility, cast out the dark souls of functionaries, and redirect us to the true and primary purpose of higher education, to enrich the mind, to enhance the soul en route to nirvana and enlightenment, and maybe on the way to get a job. Now, in support of my righteous argument, I am pleased to call 2 witnesses to testify, praise be, in this debate. Sadly, though, they're unable to be here in person today due to the fact that my first witness has been dead for over 90 years and the second for over 2,000 years, but both send their apologies. The first witness I'm going to call, and I'm sure you're aware, I need to check this. Are you all aware of the work of the great Charles Proteus Steinmetz? If you are, put your hands up. God in heaven. I'm both surprised and disappointed by your collective ignorance. But I am delighted, though, that you're in no position to challenge my assertion that were he alive, Charles, or Charlie to his friends, would be in total agreement with my argument. Now, he did exist. Charles Proteus Steinmetz was a renowned engineer and thinker, famous in the immediate neighborhood of Schenectady in the early 1900s for a very short time. And he was the author of an important work. It's called The Value of the Classics in Engineering Education. It's sadly a rarely read masterpiece, especially by you. But the core of his argument is as follows. He argued, I quote, "Education is not the learning of a trade or profession, but the development of the intellect and the broadening of the mind afforded by a general knowledge of all subjects of interest to the human race." Eloquently, Steinmetz drove a wedge between vocational training and true education. So over the space of 100 years, Steinmetz warns us to avoid training students to be automatons, cogs in the capitalist machine, or as he puts it, tools, useful when directed by somebody's intelligence, but useless to themselves and to the world otherwise. So how do you get to be truly educated? And Steinmetz tells us all of this. He says it's most quickly secured by the study of the classics, which opens to the student worlds entirely different from the present, the world of art and literature of Greece, and the world of organization and administration of Rome. So Steinmetz is describing a form of study elsewhere, the worlds of classical Greece and Rome, metaphorically abroad. But they didn't necessarily, obviously, require physical travel. It's quite difficult to get back to ancient Greece. But he's describing an intellectual journey. The point he describes is analogous to the places we seek for our students. Locations where assumptions and orthodoxies may be disrupted, disturbed, and ultimately reconstructed by access to wisdom. Study abroad actually creates optimal conditions for empowering students to confront those disturbances. Any good educational experience, students are guided into spaces that are unfamiliar, disruptive of intellectual assumptions and norms. That's clearly the key aspiration of liberal education, access to worlds entirely different. But in study abroad, that creative disturbance and disruption is not only intellectual, but it's geographic and physical. And this directs us, through study abroad, back to the last bastions of liberal arts education, and will remain so unless we allow the utilitarian lunatics to take over the educational asylum. I'm not referring to anybody here, but, you know, if it makes sense. You know. What are the implications? Now, Steinmetz understood a key distinction between training and education. Training is the inculcation of habitual actions required to complete a task. It's a process intended essentially to transform individuals into industrial units. The fact that the tasks we're training people to do are largely redundant sometimes escapes our dulled consciousness. The assertion that internships offer a form of relevant, utilitarian and functional work experience is well-meaning but deeply misguided for the following reasons. In case we didn't notice, the world has changed. Some of us seem not to have noticed. The ways in which we live now and work are fluid and mutable. We do not have the luxury of continuity. Few of us stand on firm ground. Our forefathers may have worked the land in a fashion that they believed was timeless. The skills they taught their children were passed on through generations who may well have been born, lived and died in the same place. We do not have that security anymore. Our reality is, as Karl Marx wrote, that's the fifth Marx brother for those of you who don't know, all that is solid melts into air. Well, if you haven't read Steinmetz, well, you know. So simply, terror is not firmer anymore. Now, there may be a correlation between some fields and training. I think of alchemy, you know, which is not a heavy demand these days. Hairdressing, bricklaying, medicine, you know. But that's not the experience of most of us. And it will not be the professional and personal reality of most of our students, right? Our obligation is to go beyond the purely functional, and it's not starry-eyed idealism to seek to reconnect with the core purposes of liberal education. So the value of an internship, which I incidentally believe in, should be connected to the dynamics of change, not to some kind of Henry Ford notion of mechanistic, mindless production. So at CAPA, we see the internship as a form of research. We ask students to be participant observers in our global cities, to encounter the unknown, to adjust to the unexpected, and to cope with experiences beyond areas of comfort, to move towards some level of understanding and recognition of difference. Above all, actually, to realize the limits of their knowledge. From that, they will learn to think, not just act, and above all, we hope, listen, not just speak. So what are we trying to do? You inculcate skills like a sensitivity to nuance. This is very difficult, something I don't have at all, and most of us don't. A capacity to adapt within these unfamiliar milieu, and the ability to understand and describe difference. Now, we're clear, we all know that what we're actually teaching students, then the knowledge they gain in their internships will probably be redundant by the time they graduate. So the real value of internships has less to do with direct employability or job training, certainly not. Job training is what we do with donkeys. We tell them how to do it, and they do it. They're great at it, actually. It's more to do with the transferable skills through which students may get when they analyze and engage with unfamiliar things. In this climate, I know it's clear that we share a significant moral, social, political, educational obligation to prepare students for fulfilling and productive lives. It's most obvious, but not obviously simple. The worlds our students aspire to or find themselves in will be reshaped and reformed by the dynamics of contemporary reality. So this leads us inexorably to thinking about what skills we need to impart to our students as the world turns, remade by forces of urbanization and globalization. The only absolute constant in contemporary experience is the ironic realization that there are no absolute constants. Crucial differences between training and education. You can train a dog or a rat. They will perform certain functions, but you can't educate them. To create meaningful connections between employability and education, we need to teach students to be better thinkers, more thoughtful readers, more aware of the global context, more able to distinguish between sense and nonsense. Those are the creative skills that they need for fulfilled lives in employment and beyond. Now, the sources that most guide students towards enlightenment are, of course, the wisdom of the ancients. And to paraphrase T.S. Eliot, we know more than our forefathers, and they are that which we know. And the skills haven't changed much. What are the skills you need? You need to be observed. You need to be observation, reading, writing, speaking, thinking, and listening, a skill we don't treat very well. So if we encourage students to believe that we're making them employable by focusing on utilitarian processes in quasi-redundant environments, we're propagating illusions. Better, we should teach them to read the wisdom of the past, listen to the voices from history, speak less and think more. Which leads me to call on my second and last witness, which I'm going to ask you to identify. He is the son of Hilkiah. As soon as you get it, put your hand up. Who lived in the land of Benjamin. God in heaven. What he learnt came in the days of Josiah, the son of Amon, king of Judah. Yeah, there's one righteous man. Oh. Who is he? Nobody? Oh, God. Well, if the first failure of identification may be considered mere ignorance, this is closer to blasphemy. I'm really deeply disappointed in you. I give you, of course, the wisdom of Jeremiah, from the King James Bible, translated in the days of Shakespeare, when it is said God spoke English. Now, we could argue about that, you know, but... Now, we have to say internships for credit were rare in the days of Josiah. Nevertheless, through thoughtful and intensive reading of Jeremiah, students will learn all that is truly needed for employability. No other text is required, and I will now explain that. By way of example, Jeremiah is instructed to go abroad for the purposes of study. He's a study abroad student. He is told, pass over, he's told this, pass over, quote, 2:10, pass over the Isles of Chittim, a place we're all familiar with, and send unto Kedar and consider diligently. In other words, to use the skills of observation and diligent thought to understand a foreign environment. Now, the learning objectives are to empower Jeremiah to answer some very important questions. Is Israel a servant, was one of them. Is he a homeborn slave? Why is he spoiled? And the key one that I ask myself every morning, how art thou turned into a degenerate plant of a strange vine? That's a very important question. And these are clearly matters of some urgency in this context, though some of the questions are rhetorical, right? But Jeremiah listens with great and necessary care, because if he doesn't, he's in big trouble, right? In pursuit of wisdom, Jeremiah, like our students, is exposed then to unfamiliar languages and nations. I'll give you another quote. I will bring a nation, lo, I will bring a nation upon you from far. It is a mighty nation, it is an ancient nation, a nation whose language thou knowest not, neither understandest what they say. The imperatives here are not obscure. They instruct our students to listen, study, interpret, and learn what may be garnered from sojourns, I quote again, in the cities of the mountains and the cities of the vale, and in the cities of the south, and in the land of Benjamin, and in the places about Jerusalem and in the cities of Judah. Now, these locations, especially the land of Benjamin, don't appear with any frequency in Open Doors, it must be said, and are clearly non-traditional locations, rich in learning potential. But the world of work is also not ignored in Jeremiah. Students reading this will do well to heed this instruction. Quote, break up your fallow ground and sow not among thorns. This advice relates to many, many professional environments, most obviously to international finance and banking, worlds heavily populated, as we well know, by thorns. Furthermore, writing skills are not ignored, as Jeremiah is required, and these and other matters, he says, to publish in Jerusalem. They may be using the word publish in a different way, but to hell with that. Similarly, the skills of observing and listening are recommended. How long shall I see the standard and hear the sounds of the trumpet? Now, should students fail to acquire these skills, what's the consequence? They will be required to gird thee with sackcloth and wallow thyself in ashes. This should not be taken literally, by the way. Sackcloth and ashes are rarely acceptable dress in most internship sites. The point really is that students might usefully bring some curiosity and humility to their workplace task. It's perfectly possible that the average 20-year-old American student has somewhat less to offer than they may have been led to believe over the last 19 years. Just possible, I know it's a form of blasphemy, but one thing. And what is the price of failure if they fail to hear these things? Wormwood, the water of gall, I quote. And the consequence of failure is really not nice. The carcasses of men shall fall as dung upon the open field. That is not nice. To students, we need to explain that it needs some interpreting. This is not gender specific, for the word men and carcasses is male and female. And it's not a literal outcome of failure, but a kind of metaphor for an F grade, right? Now, I do not seek, because I've got an eye that's going, how much more, you know. I do not seek to labour these points further, not even in the land of Benjamin, or in the great city of Dublin. It's obvious and irrefutable, as I move towards my conclusion, as Steinmetz teaches us that there's more to be learnt in the wisdom of the past than in the barren utilitarian arguments of the present, where in some quarters we impoverish and pollute true education with functional blasphemies. The job of universities is to educate students, and maybe thus to become employable. It's a consequence. We might all remember this injunction as we listen to the feeble justifications of those who oppose this motion. And my last quote from Jeremiah is, "Behold, ye trust in lying words that cannot profit." Sadly, we live in a new utilitarian age. Higher education is being driven by a crude vocational agenda. We need to redefine our priorities and reconnect with the tradition of liberal education to create education opportunities that enrich students' lives beyond mere utility. My very last thoughts. I could cite many other sources in support of my position. Homer, who did not, as far as we can ascertain, do any kind of internship, would probably agree. Moses required no workplace training to build an ark. Job learnt through boils, you know. Socrates, who never had a job of any kind other than thinking, and Plato, whose job was to listen to Socrates and write down what he said. They would all support this argument. What they had is wisdom, something we don't talk much about in the discourses of education in these utilitarian days. So my argument has the authority of these sources, in particular Charles Proteus Steinmetz from Schenectady and Jeremiah of the land of Benjamin attest to the validity of these arguments. To vote against this proposition, therefore, might be considered at best ill-informed and at worst as a kind of blasphemy. Thus, Steinmetz, Jeremiah, and Woolf rest their case.
Order! Order! Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Now, I want to call upon the Right Honourable Representative from the constituency of South Kensington, the leader of the Edisonian Alliance, Dr. Kristin Dean. But before I do, I have quite a revelation. Dr. Dean had a breakthrough inspiration in the fact that she would like to bring this debate into the 21st century. And she's asked to use something called audio-visual support, whatever that is. And I'm happy to say that she's been granted that privilege. Dr. Dean.
Esteemed colleagues of the GIC, lords and ladies, Dr. Woolf, I hate to disappoint you all, but I don't think we disagree on all points. We clearly agree that the job of universities is to educate. We agree that university experiences, especially study abroad, are, to quote you, Mike, optimal for empowering students to acquire relevant competencies as they are guided into unfamiliar spaces disruptive of intellectual assumptions and cultural norms. We even agree with Steinmetz's assertion that university education is not, and I would insert entirely, the learning of trade or profession, but the development of intellect and broadening of the mind. Now that may be the limit to how much I agree with Steinmetz. And my conciliatory tone, I may have to concede, may have a bit to do with the fact that Mike's a big boss, and I don't want to upset him too terribly through this. But now, Mike, our paths do diverge at some point. Where our paths diverge is where we believe the value of these lessons is best applied. I'm here to argue that the educated, challenged, and broadened mind that you speak of does more than just create a more nuanced thinker, an enlightened person, I argue that such a broadened mind benefits students not only in their search for gainful employment immediately following graduation, but more importantly, in a richer and more fulfilling career in the long run. It's the very virtues of higher education that enhance employability. The large price tag that comes along with higher education, and study abroad on top of that, makes employability not just a convenient side product of our offerings, but to some a moral imperative. In support of my argument, I'm pleased to call upon 420 witnesses. Thank you all for being here. Our colleagues in attendance to this most successful GIC conference. Well, I may not be calling everyone to the stand individually, but I have watched some of your presentations and I've chatted with some of you over coffee. The work undertaken by our colleagues with us here today is evidence of the primary importance of employability to university education and is further an indication that our work is not done. I'd like to address some of the points you've raised, Mike. Dr. Woolf, I mean, sorry. Mr. Prime Minister, Doctor. We'll work on that, sorry. And if it's all right with you, I'll refer to our work as the work of all our colleagues here today. As I've just said, I think we agree more than we disagree. I'd just like to push the line of inquiry a bit further. So let's start about with this idea of training versus education, shall we? You've spoken to the extent of to some extent, of Joseph Steinmetz. Just to do a little historiographical query here. Steinmetz published this article from which you quote in 1910. In 1910. So this is a year when less than 50% of the population of the United States graduated from high school. A year when less than 10% of the population of the United States graduated from university. So understandably, the environment and the nature, the role of an educator, of professors, of the university in general, has changed significantly over time, I would say. Now, in 1910, Steinmetz warned that by focusing on employability, universities tread dangerously near territory where students are treated as tools, useful when directed by somebody's intelligence, but useful to themselves and to the world, or no, useless to themselves and to the world otherwise. The jobs which Steinmetz seems to be describing are those of factory floors and assembly lines. I can see Steinmetz's point here, but the style of training that Steinmetz warned of is not the style of learning students engaged while studying at university today, while studying abroad, and not even when they're undertaking an academic internship placement. Internships are not industrial training in its pure form. They're messier, they're more complex. They involve real people in real time, involving real decisions with real consequences. The academic framework for these experiences provide the support and resources that will allow students to gain perspectives on their own decision-making processes and to appreciate the complexity of the broader world of work. Perhaps some of our colleagues in the audience will have attended Brian Adriano's presentation yesterday, which described a model of academically embedded internship placements within the business school at George Washington University. Forgive me, Brian. My summary is very brief, and if you are here, I do very much apologize if I get it at all wrong. So, as described by Dr. Adriano, this model focused on interpersonal interactions and analytical skills, requiring students to submit work for assessment every step along the way. By virtue of the fact that this internship is both a practical exercise and also analyzed academically, students are required to reflect upon their decisions, use resources, and conduct analyses in a manner that's very different from what you see simply within the workplace. The GW example is one of many that I've been presented throughout this conference. Mike, you just spoke to our model at CAPA. I understand our colleagues from FIE did a lovely presentation just a few hours ago, and thank you all for that. These models, along with others, are really just a sampling. That this is a sampling, it indicates that a new level of nuance and sophistication in the design of experiential education curricula worldwide is being achieved. Now, Mike, you spoke of Jeremiah a bit. Learning through travel, learning through discomfort, and learning how to learn. How do you figure that narrative could have been different if he had that academic framework around him, if he would have had an instructor there to guide his lines of inquiry, to push him a bit further into the realms of self-reflection, imagine how that would have changed the narrative. Just think. Now, let's switch to skills. In our line of work, we speak of skills very often. Right Honorable Prime Minister, you've provided us with a short list of skills you believe students must gain through university education. Observation, reading, writing, speaking, thinking, listening. Completely agree that all of these are invaluable. Absolutely. Unfortunately, I think this list is just a bit dated. I think you may be just as dated as your sources. This list is just too short, and it is just too simple. You see, our students, through their classes, through their internships, through their internship classes, our students are learning about, building, and using a list of skills far longer than what you've just described. And what of hard skills and soft skills and technical skills? Our students are engaging all of those in labs, in classrooms, in virtual environments. They're not content to sit in a lecture alone. They aren't content with the status quo of days gone by. Our students today, whether we like it or not, and sometimes we do not like it, they demand more of us. I think your short list of skills is selling us short. As educators, we are capable of, and are already actively doing, a lot of us, so very much more. Two important skills that I think you've left off your list are teamworking and problem solving. Mary King discussed this during her presentation yesterday, highlighting that engagement in internship learning is both a process and an outcome. That this style of engagement can be pursued for years after the internship placement. Attending lectures and listening, reading texts and analyzing, that's great and certainly necessary, but our classrooms are now helping our students to work with one another and to solve problems actively, collaboratively, in new and truly exciting ways. And why are we doing this? Because we want to have our teaching to have a positive and lasting impact on our students. We want to teach them to apply lessons from the classroom, as we have learned ourselves over time. What is perhaps even more apparent, though, is that our students are demanding this of us. They know how useful team building and problem solving will be to them in the workplace. And these are the types of things that they know they will benefit from our guidance on in the long run. This morning, Brett Bergquist surprised nearly nobody in the room when he shared statistics that placed employability as the #1 reason why students attend university. To our students, employability is key. To us, employability must be key. So, Dr. Woolf, I don't think we're disagreeing with one another entirely. Where you are arguing that the purpose of university is education, I'm arguing that one of the greatest uses of a university education is employability. Surely, there's a way our two different viewpoints can work together. I really could carry on much longer on this subject, but I'd like to conclude with just a few further remarks, or maybe just to reiterate a remark I've just made. Employability is the key to university education in the eye of our students. If we want to ensure a return on their investment in their education, if we want to serve our students best, then we must strive to give them the right tools, the practical tools, the analytical tools that allow them to perform comfortably and intelligently within their professional lives. The lessons we can share with our students can last them a lifetime. A long-term view of employability is the return on the investment that our students deserve. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much to the leader of the Edisonian Alliance. Now, in support of the Socratic Liberal Party's position, I'm going to call upon the Right Honourable Representative from the District of the West Village, Dr. Philip Kain. Dr. Kain.
Hello. I've been asked to represent faculty, something I do often. And I can tell you without a doubt that if I sat in a faculty meeting and told a group of faculty that their purpose was employability, many would openly weep. In addition to that, I want to start off by saying in a group of faculty, most have had the ability to be employed in a single position, often at a single university. I don't think you want these people teaching employability. What I think you wanting us do is doing what we do best, which is teaching students to think and be students. And that's the point I'm going to make today. And I want to tell you what's happening at the universities now. This is not your grandmother's university anymore. Things are changing at the university, and we are moving from a place that is driven by content to a place that seeks to understand context. And that's what I do, and that's what all of my colleagues do. The sage on the stage is dying. A decade or so ago, or many decades ago, when I was in college, if I wanted to learn about Byzantium, I waited for someone's office hours. I waited in line to get into their office. I asked them a question about Byzantium. They mumbled a number of sources. I wrote them down with a pencil and a piece of paper. I went to the library. I looked for a book. It was not there. I got an interlibrary loan. I waited for the book. The book eventually came. It was overdue. I paid a large fine, didn't read the book, and returned the book. But now all of that, the world of information is in your hand, and your request is as far away as your fingertips. But the most important part of having that power is that we need to know how to ask the right questions. And that's what we're doing at the university. We are teaching students how to ask important questions. This is what we call academic inquiry, and we hear a lot about great research institutions, but what you must remember is that at the backbone of all research is a question. And that's what we are asking students to do. Which brings me to my second point. We don't prepare students for employment. We actually prepare them to stay employed. Those are two very different things. And skills might get you in the door. An employer might be impressed by the fact that you can do Excel formulations in your sleep. That might get you a job, but it won't help you keep it. What helps you keep a job is the ability to develop new perspectives on old situations, to think critically, and to make judgment and decisions after a careful review of evidence, which is exactly what we do at the university, which brings me to my final point. We prepare you for a career in the marketplace of ideas. And my colleague referenced many of the excellent presentations that we've heard. I don't know if that was a way to woo votes or not, but either way, I'll do the same thing. And in many of the presentations that I heard, we talked about reflection and having students reflect on their internship experience. And I would like to suggest to you that at the university, we are all about reflection. We work on this in every classroom that we have. When I ask students to consider a work by Jackson Pollock, they're not studying the content. They're not there to memorize the actions that he made. Instead, what I am doing is I am removing the veil on the reflection that Jackson Pollock had. We are looking at him not as a static object. In fact, we are teaching students about the complex process of reflection by looking at Jackson Pollock's reflection on post-war anxiety, depression, or the rise of the individual in the metropolis. In a broad liberal education, we might ask a student to do a close reading of a passage in the Quran, or to understand the complicated measure in a Mahler symphony, or to work with volatile acids in a laboratory. But in each of these instances, students are not memorizing facts. They are learning the ability and the talent to reflect. They are learning to think critically and evaluate evidence in order to make a judgment about something. And that's what I ask students to do every day in the classroom, to make a decision, to make a judgment. My point here is that the skills of Microsoft Excel can be learned on the job, but critical thinking is something that you develop during your education at the university. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kain. Thank you. And finally, in support of the position of the Edisonian Alliance and representing the district of Back Bay, the Right Honourable R. Kelly Cameron.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for this opportunity to share. To the Prime Minister, the School of Theology is on East Campus. But you do bring back fond memories of Sunday school, except this time I was awake. To the professor, the world is much bigger than your classroom, sir. Let me... I had to do it, I'm sorry. On to more important matters here. Let me begin by saying universities are doing a fine job of building the intellectual capacity of students. In fact, many students are doing extraordinary research and academically related work, which demonstrates their ability to think on a very high level. For that, we owe a debt of gratitude to individuals like you, Professor. We owe a debt of gratitude to the many outstanding faculty members who are teaching at the various universities around the world represented in this room today. They're teaching, educating some of the brightest minds of our time. And quite frankly, I owe a debt of gratitude for many of the faculty members from a fine institution in Boston, Massachusetts, known as Northeastern University, for providing me with a high quality education. Continuing, without a dedicated faculty to build my intellectual capacity and challenge my thinking with encouragement to process my life and future career more substantively, I would not be standing here before you today. Let me say that again. Without a dedicated faculty to build my professional capacity and challenge my thinking with encouragement to process my life and career future more substantively, I would not be standing before you today in this professional capacity as an employed individual, which is the result of an excellent education. I'm the byproduct of a higher learning opportunity, a point in which I will return momentarily. I find it highly unlikely that many would disagree. My goodness, even in agreement with the basis of this discussion, the role of a university is to educate, to produce intellectual thinkers, no doubt about it. But are we here to state the obvious? If so, let's agree that a Mercedes-Benz is a fine automobile. But it is more than an automobile used for transportation. I don't mean to use this metaphor of an automobile to prove my point, but since I drive a Mercedes-Benz, I just thought I'd say that. Don't be mistaken. I'm not offering a shameful plug for Mercedes-Benz. I'm simply attempting to prompt thought regarding the larger role of a university, which is to produce a higher level thinker that will engage a changing, challenging, and often dynamic workforce for long-term employability. Let's be honest here. We see it time and time again where universities vie for #1 status in more than one area. For example, universities vie for #1 status to have the best teaching faculty and administrative staff, the best academic programming and services available to students, the best sports programs and recreational facilities, and of course, the best students that are being recognized academically in various ways. The list continues, and without being the best in one or more categories, it's virtually impossible and unreasonable to justify the inflated cost of a higher education. Perhaps it's more affordable here, but in the United States, they're inflated. The point being, as universities vie for #1 status, we announce to the corporate community, we have the best, so do yourself a favor and hire one of our graduates. Over the course of my career, I cannot knowingly recall a time where industry leaders have not accredited their higher education institutions for adequately preparing them for their career. Even billionaire Mark Zuckerberg, a co-founder of Facebook, often credits Harvard University for positioning him to think differently about technology, its fundamental uses, and his eventual career. Now, had an individual like Mark Zuckerberg attended an individual, say, like Northeastern University, okay, you'll get that later. I'm certain his co-op advisor would have connected him with 1 or 2 outstanding technology-based internships to broaden his knowledge. His professors would have encouraged him to think intellectually about his career and possibly his entrepreneurial spirits. His academic advisor would have coordinated the remainder of his degree program after said internships, usually a 5-year plan for the career-minded student, and eventually help him to use his internship experiences to launch Facebook. But once again, another story for another time. But the premise of this example is what I hope everyone in the room will take away from the larger purpose of this discussion, which is universities preparing individuals for employment. To the advocates, I encourage you to abandon your firm thoughts of universities serving as a single-cell organism, institutions designed merely to educate or produce educated thinkers. Instead, expand your thoughts of universities as institutions producing individuals who will ultimately enter the workforce, who challenge the status quo of employment practices, who bring forth change to industry-related practices, who reject normative behavior in business, who innovate and lead in their respective career fields. Advocates, universities are producing individuals who are employable upon completion of their degree programs, individuals who are eager and anxious, I say, to launch their careers. I see it daily in my professional employed capacity, where individuals from multiple cultures, ethnic groups, and various parts of the world who are excited about completing, sir, their programs of study. They clearly have, we clearly have opposing views here. We really do. But I tell you, universities are producing the future workforce. As I prepare to close, the argument for the primary role of a university is employability. And it's rather simple if I use 2 fundamental points to support my position. The first being, the employment market hires university graduates who bring a degree of employment experience to the workforce, usually in the form of an internship-related opportunity. In fact, internships are often the gateway for students to enter the workforce. To underscore the point, similar to the process in which universities select its incoming students, employers use metrics to determine employability of a graduate. But instead, we don't use grade point averages. We use skills and experiences for a job or a hire. Another point is where students and employers and colleagues, let me rephrase. Another point to the student and the employer, colleges and universities are a means to an end. Again, to underscore the point, higher education is the prerequisite for long-term employability. For the student, a university is bound by specific time and defined space. Time, typically a period of 4 years to complete an undergraduate program of study, or perhaps 2 years for a graduate level program. Space, the physical plant, the brick and mortar of the fine institutions around the world. I say again, we are in agreement. The end product of a university is to produce an educated person, but an educated person who will become a professional with a career, an equipped individual who embarks on a much longer journey through time and space, where the results of the journey are professional fulfillment and a life of prosperity, if the university graduates its individuals with a career-minded framework. Either way, what could be better than a life of prosperity and a life of fulfillment professionally? In my opinion, the role of a university is employability. Ladies and gentlemen, this ends my comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cameron. Now, we have the opportunity for a few questions from the delegates here. I would ask you to wait to ask your question until the microphone arrives, because this is being filmed. Identify yourself, and if possible, your institution, and say to whom your question is directed. Please limit your questions, even if you have vigorous and vociferous opinions. Please limit your questions to 60 seconds. Now, who would like to start? Oh.
So I guess this is addressed. I'm Alex with Masa Israel, by the way. I guess this is addressed to the folks on the education side over there. My colleague over here brought up a great point about the rising costs of education in America. If employability isn't your goal, how can students pay back these burdensome loans at the end of the day?
Yeah, well, they can't.
Order. This could be a problem. Direct question, direct answer. What else do we have out there?
Thank you very much. Simon O'Leary from Regent's University in London. Also for the Prime Minister. Maybe have a longer response this time. Education has always been about developing leading members of society, and of course historically our great universities, whether it was to develop clergy, whether it was judiciary or academics indeed, and of course were very selective for many years, have always been vocational. Indeed, you could argue that the original production line was not Henry Ford's Model T, but the historical universities producing those academics, producing those members of the judiciary and clergy. So in a world where university has progressed and opened up, the aim continues to remain vocational, do you not agree? Albeit that the vocation has now extended beyond those traditional roles and into the 21st century roles to create leading members of society across the public, private and the third sector.
Well, I would take issue. I don't think it was all. When I was there at university, I spent a long time in universities, and we mostly debated how many angels danced on the head of a pin. That's what I was around, in between taking classes in advanced alchemy. I don't think they were very vocational. See, I think what we did is create original people. And you know, one way, I don't see the logic in how would you create original people? By taking students into a location so that they can learn to copy what someone else does. You're propagating that role. Yeah, Dickens, Shakespeare, Melville, Hawthorne didn't do internships. I believe I haven't answered your question because I don't know how to, but...
Right. Well, I don't know. Is it just me, or are we all getting more confused by the questions and answers than we were before? In any case, let's try to sort this out. Another question, please.
I'm Rebecca Woolf from USA Academic Internship Programs, and I'd like to ask the opposition if the primary value of a college education is wasted if you are not employed at the end of it, if there are things beyond your control, or perhaps you've made a decision to be employed in non-paying work.
You okay with me taking it? I think in academics we're quite good at playing with words. And the term employability can be morphed. And I don't think a paycheck defines employability. I think that with disability comes new and more creative opportunities for functionality. And the lessons from the university classroom and that amazing professor who opened your eyes to that experience can still, even if you don't have a paycheck or if you can't find a job and the, you know, hey, the economy drops out, right? It happens. We've seen it happen. Or you raise, oh, heaven forbid, you raise children, right? There's another kettle of fish. Right. So I think despite whether the paycheck is present or not, the lasting effects of an employability-focused curriculum can really make a positive impact throughout an individual's lifespan. That's sort of the heart of my argument. Did you want to add anything?
If the individual is not, and I agree, employability has multiple definitions, but you can always go back to the classroom if you so choose, where these fine gentlemen would prefer you to be.
I'm just going to add a thought. Employability does not mean, and I think Rebecca and I agree with this, having a job. I have 2 children who are theoretically employable. One's an actor and one's a historian, enough said.
Right. Well, originality all round. Anything else before we do our vote, before I explain the vote? Oh, yes.
I'm Jamanda, I'm from Lithuania, and I would like to ask the opposition whether they think that employability and career is the same. I know a lot of people who are employed, but they will never, never, never make any career.
I didn't hear this.
If I could try to repeat your question. You're asking if employability and a career.
If employability and career is the same or not. Because I know a lot of people who are employed and they have no education, but they will never make a career. That's what I think. What is your opinion?
Right. All right.
Employability versus career. So those who are holding, sorry, I'm just still clarifying. So those who can hold a job, but that's not a career, is the question.
She's trying to tell you about the differences. She's asking about the differences between being employed and having a career.
Certainly. Yeah, certainly. And I do think, and I think within the language that I chose within my presentation, I really played with the choice of career readiness, career preparedness versus employability. I do think that it's career readiness that university is best guided towards, where you do see employed people who have a job, but nobody really knows exactly what it is that they do all day. But I do think in the context of this debate, I would say that university can serve both purposes, should serve both purposes, but ultimately it's the fulfilling and lasting career that I think we're going for.
Kelly, did you want to say something? Well, I think we're giving the last word to the Prime Minister, who will give us his opinion on the difference between employability and career, and then we will go to the vote.
Just a thought, you know, if you have no skills whatsoever that are useful and you've done many years of education, the perfect field is international education, I find. I have worked since 1897 in this field without any discernible talent at all, without any skills whatsoever. So it seems to me you're in very good company here.
To round out that session of questions and answers, I want to say that I know we have a couple of representatives of the press here, and none of this is to leave this chamber. Do you understand? Because people will think we're totally daft. All right. Now, I'm going to explain the vote. Now, first thing you should know is that, yes, we're going to vote based upon your appreciation of the arguments that were entertained and expressed this afternoon. Because you're sitting on one side does not mean you must vote for that side. You are perfectly free. The whips, the party whips have given you free rein to vote your conscience. So you vote by color. When I ask to see a show of, what are these things called here? Well, palettes. You hold up purple if it is for education. Toward me, please. Could I ask the interns to come down to help judge this? Yes, it's all in their hands. This is the next generation. And yellow if you are voting for employability. We're really asking you to vote based on how convincing the arguments were, not the preconceptions that you came in with this afternoon. All right. Are we ready? Purple, education. Yellow, employability. A show of hands, please. This is probably too close to call. This is midnight on election night. Some districts still to come in. We have a solution here. No, we don't want to be arbitrary. We have a solution. Thank you. You can put them down. This pollster has said too close to call. So what we're going to do is ask you to deposit your ballot into one of two urns or boxes. Now, don't worry. Well, you don't have to vote. No, you can abstain. You can be a bad citizen if you like. But, but this is your profession, after all. No, you don't have to vote at all. But just know that even though you're putting in a ballot that has yay and nay, depending upon which urn you put it into, that is who you're voting for. So where are our urns? I said, this is the next generation. Jack, have you? Go see if you can help her bring one in, would you? Thank you. Thank you. Right. Yes, hanging chads is right. We hadn't anticipated that it would be this close, but it's very good that it was. It shows that there's a lot of thinking going on, and I hope some of the ideas have resonated with you and you take them back with you.
What if we feel that both, not an either or, but a both and?
You cannot vote twice. You cannot vote twice. They do that in some countries, but not here, all right? Yes. Well, I don't know. We may have our voting franchise taken away from us here by the student interns. Revenge of the students, you see? Good. So, shall we say that as you file out, if you are voting for employability, you will put your ballot into Fallon's bag, and Jack will have the education bag on the other side. Jack is education, Fallon is employability, all right? No confusion here. All right, you vote on the way out. We will count them. We will tally them accurately. honestly, and we will announce the result at the closing reception, which I am asked to tell you is on the top floor or the 4th floor of the building where we've spent the last 2 days with the class, with the rooms, the presentation rooms, up on the 4th floor, and we will announce the winner at that reception. All right? Thanks to all of you. Thank you for coming.